So I have never talked about my favorite books of all time on my channel, but then I discovered Ideal Bookshelf, which is like a online shop. And then I decided, well, maybe I could nail down what my favorite books are if it meant that I could then get them on a mug, which is exactly what I did. This is that mug. I'm going to show you it closer up once we talk through the books that are on it. But basically you can get like a bunch of customized things that are like watercolor versions of like the spines of books. And then you can select your favorite books from the list. There are tons available. And then you can also order new ones available, which I did for 2 of the ones here. And then that like watercolor art is like scanned and then, you know, put on the thing that you choose. So thank you so much to Ideal Bookshelf for wanting to work with me at all and sending me this mug. So full disclosure, I told them in the email, like I'm going to buy one anyway, but I would love to work with you. But I did end up paying for having 2 books added to the list of books that you can choose for this. Cause like I couldn't imagine this mug without those 2 books. It would be incomplete. But everything else was like already on the site. There are tons on there already. So let's go through my favorites. I can't believe I'm finally doing this. I feel like this is just a video that I've been like, at some point I'm gonna have to make that one. And I just kept putting it off. So the first one we have here is Breakfast for Champions by Vonnegut Jr. So if you've been around, you probably already know that I really like Kurt Vonnegut's writing. I haven't been reading it as much lately, but it holds a very special place in my heart because I fell in love with his writing as I was falling back in love with reading. So he is one of 2 authors that has more than 1 book on this list. But for Breakfast of Champions specifically, this one is so very Vonnegut that I have to include it. So this is about Dwayne Hoover and Kilgore Trout, who are like our 2 characters that are going to meet in the book. So it's leading up to them meeting, their meeting, and afterwards, the aftermath of that. Also, Kilgore Trout specifically is a very famous character throughout all of Vonnegut's works. He is often just brought up, sometimes like really quickly, and sometimes he plays a bigger role, but he is an author in the books. And it's kind of through him and through this book in general that Vonnegut puts in a lot of his like smaller ideas for writings and also like little doodles and stuff that he doesn't think that he will ever be able to put into like a full novel, either because it's not a big enough idea or because he simply has far too many ideas to be able to write about all of them in his lifetime. So we end up getting like so much in just this book. So next up, which I'm using the mug literally to go through this list, is kind of cheating because it is the entire adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I don't know what I would pick as my favorite. You know what? That's a different list for a different video. But Sherlock Holmes for me was such a big moment in connecting with like mystery novels, I guess more. It is a very classic detective novel. I don't think we would have a lot of detective novels, at least not in the way that we do now, without Sherlock Holmes like starting that off. I don't even particularly like detective novels all that much unless there is a great supporting character, a great partner. And Dr. John Watson is one of my favorite literary characters of all time. I love him. So this fits the bill for me. But just in general, getting into, I wasn't really into reading like mystery novels or thrillers, which would, you know, be an extension of that later. And now that's one of my favorite genres. So I attribute a lot of that to reading Sherlock Holmes and then getting more interested in that, as well as one other classic author in that same realm, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And actually this one kind of helps as well. Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. When you think sci-fi and thriller together, it's Michael Crichton. You know, just no one does it like him. At least not that I've read. This book I remember reading on a cruise in January of 2020, which is just before, as we all know, our own sci-fi thriller started, just on Earth in general. But I remember like not wanting the ship to dock when I got to like a certain point in this book, because I was like, I need to finish this. Like I can't go on an excursion and have not finished this. I had so much fun reading this. I read through it so quickly, and like I would actually read this again. There are very few like thrillers that I feel like I would read again. This one I would for sure. This is my actual coffee mug right now. I don't have any coffee in this because I knew I was going to be like handling it so much that I did not want to actually drink my coffee in it. But honestly, I'm so excited that I'm finally filming this video because now I can use this mug in my videos. I've been waiting to do that because I didn't want to use it before this video came out. Okay, next is Life of Pi. I've definitely talked about this one a fair few times on my channel already. This is one of my absolute favorite books of all time. It's also probably the book that I have read through the most, or at least the adult book that I've read through the most. I originally got this book because I had to read it for my freshman year of high school. This was a part of my summer reading list. And I remember that initial time reading it being like, when is this tiger gonna show up? Because if you know anything about this book, then you know it's about a boy on a boat with a tiger. But this book is split into 3 parts, the majority taken between the first 2, and the first part is not that. It's setting up Pi's life before this. So this follows Fasim Patel, or Pi, and his life with his family who owns a zoo, and then leading up to them making a big move and moving with their animals, like on a big ship. And then there's a shipwreck, and Pi winds up on like a lifeboat with a tiger, as well as a couple other animals. My first time reading through this, I didn't really care for it. I remember getting to like when the actual tiger and boat situation happened and enjoying it a lot more. So second part is boat and tiger. The third part is the shortest, but it has a huge impact to the story as a whole. In talking about that in class, I was like, whoa, like I missed something. So after I graduated high school, I decided to try to read this book again, and I loved it. So I think that this book for me really exemplifies how a book can present to you these different meanings that it could mean, and then you as the reader get to decide what you connect with more, and maybe even at different points in your life you connect a bit more to something different. And I really like that. Also, it got me thinking about religion in a completely different way that I think was very necessary for me personally. What's next? Rules of Civility by Amor, Towles, another one that I own physically. So this is our other author that has 2 books that show up on this mug. And so this first one is Rules of Civility, which follows Katie New Year's Eve in 1938, and she meets Tinker? Is that his name? Who is a super wealthy, like, finance bro. Imagine people calling each other finance bros in the 1930s. But he's very wealthy, and he's in a very, like, different part of society than she is. And she kind of gets pulled into this new society, and this is in New York City. She kind of gets pulled into this, and so this book follows them, like, for that year. I think, for me, Amor Towles in general, I attribute him with teaching me how much I love atmosphere, like how big atmosphere is for me in books. Okay, and next we have Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This one I've already talked about on my channel. I have like a full video reviewing this book. So this one, it's kind of like a dual timeline situation. So we're following Marianne, who is a pilot that is attempting to circumnavigate the globe. That's like her end goal, but it's through her life that you're following her. And then also Hadley, I think her name is, in more present day, and she is cast to play Marion in a movie based off of her life. Personally, I much prefer the Marion chapters, like those portions of the book. Hadley was kind of like, yeah, whatever for me. But I think that that's a testament to how great the Marion sections were, that this is still one of my favorite books of all time. When there's another section of the book where I was just like, okay, yeah, it's good. Like that was the extent of my feelings about that. But the Marion sections were just like so good. And the characters are written so well. You feel like you really know them. You really understand like the decisions that they end up making through the book. It's just, I love it. And next we have Elena Knows by Claudia Piñero, and translated by Francis Riddle. My battery died, so I'm back now. Anyways, we were talking about Elena Knows. So this is one of the books that I ordered to like have the spine be painted so that it could be included on any like of the customization pieces. So this follows Elena, whose daughter is found dead and presumed to have committed suicide, but Elena doesn't believe that that is something that her daughter would do, and so she spends the story trying to basically prove that she didn't kill herself. Not only that, but Elena has Parkinson's, and it's pretty far advanced, so it is kind of tough to watch her navigate this and to go outside and like talk to people, and the way that other people talk to her. And there's just the feeling that this book gives you. I've never had such a strong feeling about a book, not even about a book, that a book has made me feel while reading it, to the point where it was almost physical, not even just like emotional. Just this absolute like weight just pulling you down. And which sounds like a weird thing to say about a book that like I think everybody should read. That experience, I don't know. I don't know. Ooh, House of Leaves. Okay. This was another one that like really did something new for me, which I think is why it's wound up on this list, which is just like being so uniquely itself and like playing with format and writing and styles and having like footnotes on footnotes on footnotes and just being overall not what I would think of when I think of just like a book. And I absolutely loved it. Like, it's a book. Okay. It's a story of a guy reading a book that's about somebody watching a movie or a video, I think, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've read it. But also, like, the text and the way that it shows up on different pages looks differently. Like, sometimes it'll be to the side and upside down, and there'll be, you know, pages without many words on them. There'll be pages just filled, like every margin crammed with words. And you really feel like you're a part of the history of this story that has been told and retold in so many ways, and you just feel like you're the most recent member of that, which is just really cool. Okay, next we have Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. So House of Leaves is very meta, and this book is also very meta. That is something that I like in books. I feel like it can't be done too often, otherwise it doesn't give the same punch, and I do think that it's starting to become more and more popular in books, so I'm a little bit worried about that, but at this point I'm still just having fun with it. And I think some books do it better than others. I think Interior Chinatown does a great job of it. So the entire thing is written like a script, like it would be made for a TV show. And so the title comes from like Interior Chinatown. These are the characters that are on the screen, where it's setting up a scene. But it also talks a lot about racism, mostly from the like Asian American perspective, but it does have a couple others that are represented as well, just not going as much into it, because obviously Charles Yu doesn't have like that kind of background, so he's more focusing on the one that he knows. But I do like that those are included and that there's nuances to each community and the specific kind of racism that they face day to day. So there is, not only is this written like a TV script, but also there is a TV show happening like through this. And this isn't the script for that show. That show is just happening during like the script of this book, which is where we get into like the meta portion of it. It's a great book, and I feel like it could feel almost gimmicky that it is being written like a script, but Charles Yu just does it in a way that it's just really great. Next is Educated by Tara Westover. So this is actually a memoir, which is about Tara Westover's life growing up in a Mormon household, and not only just like a Mormon household, but they're also survivalists, prepping for the end of the world, basically. And specifically, she takes the perspective of how important education was for her, because she didn't really have access to any form of education for a lot of her life, but she ends up being able to go to college, and through that opened her eyes so much more. But, you know, she's not the only one in her family. There's also other siblings. So seeing her story versus their story, I think that above everything really drives home the point of the memoir, but also it's just told really, really well. Tara Westover does like an incredible job writing it. Then we've got Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So this is one of my favorite sci-fi authors like ever. And I think this is one of my favorites of the year, last year or the year before. I can't remember when it came out. I've recommended it to anybody that likes sci-fi, even the slightest bit. I think it's so much fun. It's so fast paced. Basically, it starts with a guy waking up on a spaceship, having no memories at all. Just kind of knowing that he's like here and something's going wrong. But it goes so much more beyond that. It is so fascinating to learn about him and who he is and why he's on this mission and what this mission's for, and also just the things that unfold from there. And then we've got Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. So this book is loosely based on Kurt Vonnegut's real life experiences when he was in World War II and was in the bombing of Dresden, Germany, and then was taken as a prisoner of war, and where he was kept for part of that time was in an old slaughterhouse with a 5 above the door. So this story follows Billy Pilgrim, who goes through the same experience, but also Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. And so he is kind of living his life in different pieces. You're following him like jumping to different areas of his life, which includes aliens at one point. Such a great book, such a creative way to tell a story that must have been really difficult to tell. And the messaging in it is great. There's so many of my favorite quotes are from this book. And then we've got And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So this is the one I kind of alluded to when I was talking about Sherlock Holmes as the other book that really sparked my interest in continuing on with mysteries and even getting into more contemporary mysteries. I read And Then There Were None for the first time for school, and it was by far my favorite book that I ever had to read for school during that school time. Some other books that I had to read during school became favorites later, like Life of Pi, but this was one that I remember right away just absolutely loving. To give you seemingly so limited options in like the whodunit of it and still be able to surprise you in the end and to give you reasons to be suspicious like all over the place. It's done really, really well. And then there is Real Life by Brandon Taylor. So this book follows Wallace, who is going to school then a university in the Midwest, but he's from Alabama originally, and his father has recently passed away when the story starts. The whole book takes place just over one weekend, but so much and so little happens in that one weekend. Really, all of the pieces of this are in these little moments that have a lot more significance, but on the surface seem smaller. And I just think that being in the world of this book was, I mean, it felt like a real life. And I think that that's obviously the entire point. Although a part of me does wish that I could see where Wallace ends up later in life. Next up is Becoming by Michelle Obama. So this is the other memoir that I have on this list. I think this book for me like really showed how differently I thought about the world versus how it actually was, or not really the world, but the US in particular. I think that through my education and through my upbringing, I learned a very specific way of the US and a specific way to look at Obama being elected as president as like a racism solved type of thing. And reading Michelle Obama's experience through that, like obviously at the point that I was reading this book, I already knew that it was different, but it's highlighting those differences. And because I can remember exactly what I was thinking at that same point in time, but from a much narrower point of view. And so reading that and just reading about the presidency in general, but from her eyes was really, really cool. Also, she narrates the audiobook, which I highly recommend if you're thinking about reading this book. And not only that, the major like message of the story is just about you're always like becoming who you are. You're never just like, you know, oh, boom, now you are who you are. You had your coming of age and now you are of age. And like, that's it. Instead, it's like a constant process that you're always becoming you. And I just think that that's a really sweet message, especially coming from someone who, you know, it must have seemed like her whole life was leading up to becoming the first lady. But even past that, she's still doing things. Like she still has stuff going on. And even if it's not as in the spotlight as it was previously, it's still huge to her. And she must still feel more herself than ever she did previously, just as most people do. In any current point in time, you feel the most you've ever been. And then next is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, which I've talked about Jeff Vandermeer, I think, quite a bit on this channel. This was my first ever climate fiction book that I can remember reading, and it opened up my eyes to like a whole new genre. I love this genre. I love when sci-fi, it focuses specifically on like the life within plants. It's just like taking that perspective as opposed to like machinery, like a more organic science fiction. I think that that's so cool. And that's what this book is. That's a large part of what this book does. So basically it is about a woman who goes into what's known as Area X. This is a part of a trilogy as well. This is the first book of a trilogy. So there's like a group that is going in there and you know so little information going into this book. But I also really like that so much of it is up to interpretation. I think that that's super cool. I still haven't seen the movie because I've heard it was really bad and I'm kind of terrified about it. And then we have another book that I've talked about ad nauseum on this channel, Burnt Sugar by Apni Doshi. So this book is about a mother and daughter, and the mother has Alzheimer's, or at the very least is getting worse at remembering things. And the daughter is kind of taking care of her through that, but also she holds like a lot of resentment for her mother. The first line of this book, I mean, makes it very clear. I would be lying if I said my mother's misery has never given me pleasure. So Antara is the daughter and Tara is the mother. So Antara holds a lot of resentment towards her mother. They also remember the past in two very different ways. But I think that beyond that and beyond what is kind of at this plot's core, just the writing in general in this is so unique. And there are just like periods of the story that become something like utterly outside of this novel. in a way that I find it hard to talk about without talking about specific scenes. It's just doing storytelling in a way that I really love. And I've just now seek out in other books. And if I find books that even slightly give me the feelings that reading this book for the first time gave me, I like them all the more for that. Okay, and up next is The Overstory by Richard Powers. I'm a sucker for books about nature. This is one of the most nature-feeling books I've ever read. It's all about trees, and there are different stories for different people, but they all relate back to trees in some form. Fantastic writing, fantastic characters. I don't really have much else to say about this. It's very straightforward as to why I like this book. It's written really well. Then we have Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. This one's kind of weird because I feel like when I was initially reading it, I didn't think that it was, like, I liked it, but I didn't think that it was of this tier for me. And it wasn't until I sat with it for a while after, and I would say towards the end of the book, and then sitting for a while after the book, that I realized like just how much I think about it all the time. I still can't say the phrase for the time being without thinking of it in the way that this book refers to it. But I think that there's something that felt a little bit cheesy about the way that the story is told, which is basically there's a woman that finds this lunchbox that has like a story in it or a diary in it from a young Korean girl. And so she's reading through the story, and then we're also getting the story of that girl. But I think that initially it felt a little cheesy having the perspective of the person finding the diary. But I do think that it is a unique way of bringing you, the reader, into the story that maybe might have seemed less accessible initially. It also left a lot more up to like what happened to her. You know, there's this question the whole time, like what happened to have led this diary to be in a lunchbox that was then in the ocean. So that does add like a little bit of intrigue, but I think that this was just like a good entry for me personally into reading stories that are based in like not westernized countries. And so because of that, I feel very grateful for it because I found so many books that I've really enjoyed because of that. Next is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I don't have a lot to say about this that hasn't been already said. I just think that it's a really great romantic story. It's one of my favorites. I don't typically like romances, but I have read all of Jane Austen's novels. And Pride and Prejudice, just there is a reason why that's the one you hear about the most. It's so good. And next is one of the newer ones, one of my more recent reads, which is Bird by Anne Lamott. I read this for my Ted Lasso season 1 video, and I'm so glad that I did, because this for sure I never would have picked up otherwise, because this book is nonfiction about writing. But reading this did kind of reignite that like desire to write, I guess. It just seemed like fun for the first time in a while, or something that like I would be interested in doing again for the first time in a while. But really more importantly than just the writing advice in general is I think just like where the term bird by bird comes from. So basically at a certain point her brother has to write this report on birds that he had a long time to write, but he didn't, and now it's due like the next day. So he's sitting down at the kitchen table working on this, and he feels just so absolutely overwhelmed by the task that's ahead of him that he is close to tears, and their father sits down, puts his arm around his shoulder and says, "Bird by bird, buddy, just take it bird by bird." And sometimes, honestly, I really need that. And obviously that's not a new concept. There are many, many sayings out there that convey this same message, but there was something about this story and just seeing that like kindness from her father, instead of being like, well, you should have figured this out earlier. Like you had 3 months to do this and you're only now like sitting down to work on it. Like instead of looking at it that way, to be able to forgive yourself for not having done it earlier and instead just think like, okay, what can I do right now for it? All right. And then next is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. This is the other Amor Towles book. So we already talked about Rules of Civility, but this is the first book that I read by him. So this is about a man, Count Alexander Rostov, who, because of something that he has done, is basically on house arrest, but he lives in a hotel. And so he has to just stay in this hotel all the time. But because of that, he ends up meeting a lot of people and connecting emotionally with others with different circumstances than he otherwise would have in life. I really like the quietness of this story and the building of relationships, and again, the atmosphere of the hotel. Amor Towles just does atmosphere so well. The stack was a lot more stable going the other way. Okay, next we have The Remains of the Day, which I actually have 2 copies of because I initially ordered this book from Better World Books, which is like a online thrifted books website. And so you don't always know what the cover is of the book that like you're gonna get. And I ended up getting the movie cover, which I really don't like in books, but I didn't mind so much because it was just a book I was going to read. I didn't know I'd love it as much as I did. So I ended up finding this cover of it in Goodwill not that long ago. And so I was like, oh great, I can get this. And then I don't need to, like I can pass this one along. But I also really like how the spines like look together, which is such a dumb thing to say. Anyways, The Remains of the Day, another very quiet read. This is about a butler who has served this one family his whole life. I have a whole review about this book if you want to like learn more about it. But for the story, he's going on a vacation and he ends up being, you know, more in charge of his own life than he has been really at any other point in his life because he grew up in this, like his father was also a butler. And he's also coming to terms with who the people he served have been and what it means to be a butler, what it means to be like completely becoming a person specifically for another person, like to be what they need in your position and to be that all the time. And when so much of his identity is like tied up in being this person for somebody else, like who does that make him? There's a lot more that goes into it besides that, but that is really at its heart. And it really is just this like slow, quiet story that I just really loved being in. I really like Kazuo Ishiguro in general, but this was by far my favorite of his. And lastly, the last book on this is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I know technically The Lord of the Rings is one book, and this is just one part of 3 parts of that one book. But I did specifically want, like I love Fellowship of the Ring. The other 2 parts I like, but they're not like favorite book status for me. But Fellowship of the Ring, the like coming together of it, the sense of like beginning an adventure, the amount of time we get to spend in the Shire, which I love. It all really works for me. And actually talking about it now makes me want to reread it. But anyways, that is all 24 of the books on my mug. Ideal Bookshelves also does like prints, phone cases, or tote bags, notebooks, tea towels, and they're also a great gift because even if you don't know your friend's favorite books, you can give them a gift card for a customized mug or a customized print or whatever that you think that they would like the most so that they can come on and select the books themselves. There are some other items on the site like pins and stickers, even apparel like t-shirts and hats and things. So I definitely recommend checking them out. I had a great experience with them. Jane is super nice. And it's just a great way to support bookish businesses or to like give gifts to your most bookish friends. Anyways, that is going to do it for this video. I've done it. I've officially said what my favorite books are, which is kind of exciting because now, you know, maybe in a couple years, I'll look back on this and think like, oh, some of these have changed, or there are some new books that I would put on this list, and maybe some books that I would no longer include on this list. I'm excited to see kind of where that takes me. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you did, and also what your favorite book or a couple of books are in the comments. Then subscribe if you want to see the next one, and I will see you there. Bye!